Space Hulk Tactics is the recreation of the Space Hulk board game. The board game is now part of the epic Warhammer 40k anime universe. Like most anime, Warhammer 40k has a lot of very passionate fans. If you think people obsess about figures and merchandise and other anime followings, Warhammer is a million times worse because it is all about the figures and merchandise. It doesn't help that the lore itself is a bit inconsistent across various mediums. Also, despite having very few waifus to choose from, the franchise still maintains a zealous amount of fanfiction. But that more so relates to all the wars and battles that Warhammer is all about. Instead of big, jiggly breasts as fan service, this anime franchise tries for big, hard, throbbing bolter guns. You can probably imagine by now, following the lore of the anime and its various arcs, chapters, and adaptations spanning decades can be very confusing, and the video game adaptations aren't very consistent in quality either. However, I'm happy to say that Space Hulk Tactics is a solid entry in the series, but I do think that there are other games to try first if you haven't gotten into the franchise at all, or at least other mediums. It's best to start with a medium that you like, combined with the genre that you like. For me, it was Dawn of War 2 in RTS by Relic Entertainment. That game had great voice acting, decent gameplay, and an interesting story. It was really the uniqueness of the universe that kept me playing because of how over-the-top and crazy it is. And I must say that Space Hulk Tactics has many of those elements. It's a great game. It's got solid voice acting, the presentation and atmosphere lend itself to the gameplay, but the gameplay itself is mostly ripped from the board game without the cool toy novelty, but it does take a few liberties to enhance the experience. The game plays like XCOM. You and your opponent take turns on a grid-like map with characters that attack each other with attacks based on dice roll, depending on range, line of sight, and other factors. So if you hated XCOM's RNG shooting mechanics, where you had a 99% chance to hit your target and you still missed, imagine playing with an average of a 40 to 50% hit chance as the Space Marines. The difference being that depending on how you spend your action points and cards, you can get a huge advantage if you set up properly. The game has received a lot of critical updates since launch, so a lot of Steam reviews are a little bit outdated. There's a bit of a negative buzz surrounding this game. While the game ran well and still runs great, the AI was hit or miss for a while. Gene Stealers would just not attack you if you try to set up a defensive Overwatch position because it would seem unadvantageous, if that's a word. They now take more risks and try to attack you, so defensive and offensive play is still made interesting. They also added faster animation options to improve the pacing. I wanted to cover this game a bit after these issues were ironed out because this is a good game that was marred by some technical issues. It's what you'd expect from a board game to video game adaptation. You also find an online multiplayer mode and a POV mode to add immersion. I never thought playing a turn-based game could be so terrifying sometimes, as the POV mode adds a lot of tension when you keep missing your shots and the Gene Stealer just keeps coming closer and closer. This terrifying thing with claws that's going to rip your face off. You just keep unloading clips and you keep missing and it just gets closer. It's kind of scary actually, especially when you turn around and they come out of the vents. The game also features a overhead map minigame mode between missions with story dialogue and side missions to keep it interesting, add a little bit of filler. That's actually kind of nice. You get to see little bits of dialogue when you're moving around, tells you more about the area. As you move through this map, the Gene Stealer threat increases, so you need to pick your battles. Otherwise, you will have to fight through swarms of Gene Stealer missions before you can progress the story and get through the overhead map. There isn't really a failure state outside of point loss that can be used for decisions on the overhead map or to customize your squad and do better during missions. The Space Hulk board game itself, the 4th edition that I played, is a decent game, but its pacing and lengthy setup time doesn't always make it great for a Friday night group get-together. This adaptation does manage to hold my attention, as it does drip-feed mechanics and story very well. It is held up by all the improvements you would expect from adapting a board game to a video game, like the sped-up learning curve, great controls, and non-existent setup time. And the UI, by the way, is really well laid out. It does take a second to get used to the controls, to not make mistakes, which is kind of a problem if you kind of mess up. In real life, you can kind of, undo it, but here you're really just locked to doing it, as is the intent of the original rules for the board game. The atmosphere created by the voice acting, musics, and animations bringing everything to life If you're a fan of the universe or Space Hulk, you really should check it out. For everyone else, there are better strategy games on the market of this vein, like the previously mentioned XCOM, although I would still check it out on a sale. If you want a Warhammer game to get into for the gameplay and the source material, try out Battlefleet Gothic Armada or the previously mentioned Dawn of War 2. But it is really cool to see Space Hulk finally done justice. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm out.